I'm Jordan.
I'm Anna.
And I'm Hope, and this is Crash Course World History.
Today we'll be talking about the Holocaust and the effects it's had.
The Holocaust had lasting impressions on those personally affected and those influenced indirectly.
Miss Jekyll! Miss Jekyll! Yes, me from the past? I thought the Holocaust meant a sacrificial burning. That is true, but because of the intensity and impact, the meaning of the old Greek word has been forever changed. The Holocaust is one of the most influential events of all time. You may be wondering why we are focusing on the Holocaust, which is a small portion of time in the whole of world history. But the Holocaust has had enormous effect in all aspects of life. White or religious supremacy, anti-Semitism, and stereotypical profiling are still present today, and many cases are consequences of the Holocaust. Not only did the event target the Jews, but it also targeted homosexuals and gypsies. We need to look farther into the Holocaust and how it had a ripple effect globally. The people involved or affected by this catastrophe may be the most powerful of them all in telling the story. For example, Anne Frank, a young Jewish girl, has a famous diary that gave insight into how truly horrible the conditions were. One of Anne's entries was, "It's really a wonder that I haven't dropped all my ideals, because they seem so absurd and impossible to carry out. Yet I keep them because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart." The story also lies in the people who were against the Jews or were simply bystanders. One of these important people was Adolf Hitler. Hitler strongly believed that the Germans were superior, and because of this, the Jews needed to be eliminated. Hitler was leader of the Nazis, an oppressive German military power, and spread the idea of the Holocaust, the final solution. The Jews were blamed for Germany's effectiveness, which in reality was mainly a result of World War I and didn't make a whole lot of sense. This racial superiority of the Germans, referred to as Aryan, was a pure-blood mentality. Nazi propaganda and a sense of nationalism in a world of rising global competition led to security for hating the Jews. For the Germans, many were at the point where anti-Semitism had corrupted them. So what really led to the Holocaust? It's hard to know exactly, but what we do know for sure are the facts. In 1933, 525,000 Jews made up 1% of Germany's population, but this small percentage was exploited the most. The more Germany expanded, the more Jews were transported to Polish ghettos. The Jews were all forced to wear yellow stars, which made them easy to identify and subject to more abuse. In 1941, the transition from the ghettos to the concentration camps began. The peak of this transportation was 1942, when in the matter of a few months, 300,000 people were moved. As a whole, the 6 concentration camps were kept on the down low. The USA barely recognized or had awareness of the problem until 1942 of July, when an article appeared in the New York Times. The worst and most brutal oppression took place in these concentration camps. The concentration camps left no room for joy or safety, and led to many different fates. Those who survived were scarred for life. The evacuation of the camps in 1944 started the Death March, which lasted more or less until Germany's surrender in World War II.
Soviet soldiers were the first to liberate concentration camp prisoners. However, British, Canadian, American, and French army troops also worked to free the imprisoned. Believe it or not, the Germans also tried to empty the camps of any survivors, but for much more self-serving motives that will be discussed later on. Despite the Germans' best efforts to conceal any evidence of their crimes committed during the Holocaust, the Allied soldiers still found hundreds of sick and exhausted surviving prisoners, and thousands of dead bodies left stacked like piled wood. Physicians and relief workers tried to provide nourishment for the prisoners alongside the Allied troops, but many were too weak to be saved. The German evacuation of the concentration camps had 3 main motives. Number 1, to prevent any surviving prisoners from falling into the hands of the enemies and relaying their stories to the Allied and Soviet troops. Number 2, the Germans thought that they needed prisoners to maintain production of military weaponry wherever possible. Number 3, some German leaders believed irrationally that they could use Jewish concentration camp prisoners as hostages to bargain for a separate peace in the West that would guarantee the survival of the Nazi regime. Most evacuations were carried out by train or ship until 1944, when the Allied forces took control of German skies, at which point the prisoners were then forced to travel by foot. The brutal winter that year caused a dramatic increase in the number of prisoner fatalities that occurred while evacuating, because German authorities harshly mistreated and often shot any prisoners that could not keep up the pace of the march. The prisoners perceived that the Germans actually intended for them to die in such mass amounts, so they coined a new term for the evacuation, the Death March.
We've seen genocidal patterns throughout time around the world as well. For instance, let's look at the Rwandan genocide. In 1994, members of the Hutu ethnic majority murdered up to 800,000 people belonging to the Tutsi ethnic minority. This extreme hatred and killing reflects the same ideas that were in play during the Holocaust that drove Hitler and the Nazi Party to killing so many people. Basically, during this time, the whole world was affected, except for, wait for it, the Mongols.
Although the Holocaust was not a direct cause of World War II, the two were definitely connected. The abuse by the Nazis added fuel to the flame against Germany. Many other nations and countries felt that what was happening was wrong, but not enough was done to stop the violent and oppressive acts. As a whole, the world disdained Germany, but did not oppose them.
After being liberated, former prisoners of the concentration camps didn't know where to go. The Allies were prepared to return Jewish displaced persons to their homes, but many were too afraid and refused to go back. So from 1945 to 1952, more than 250,000 displaced persons lived in camps and urban centers administered by the Allied authorities in Germany, Austria, and Italy. In these camps, families were reunited, weddings were celebrated, and babies were born. Bela Warschau, who was liberated at Bergen-Belsen by the British Army in 1945, recalled her time spent at a displaced persons camp near Munich, where American troops provided entertainment and organization for the Jewish people. However, she states the problem was there was no future in being there, though the big question of where do we go from here was soon answered. When Jewish nationalism reached its height on May 14, 1948, formerly British-controlled Palestine was recognized by the US and Soviet Union as the new state of Israel. Possibly as many as 170,000 Jewish displaced persons and refugees immigrated to Israel by 1953. Another direct consequence of the Holocaust was the immense separation of children from their families in attempts to survive the violence. Between 1938 and 1940, a children's rescue effort, informally called Kindertransport, brought thousands of children without their parents to safety in Great Britain from Nazi Germany and other Germany-occupied territories. Though in safety, thousands of orphaned and missing children were left alone in orphanages and displaced persons camps. Twins, Reen Slotkin and Irene Hizmi, were born in Czechoslovakia in 1937. They were deported with their mother to the Auschwitz camp after their father was killed by the Nazi Party. During their time spent in the camp, they were experimented on and their mother was killed. After being liberated, Reen was sent to live with a doctor's sister in Britain, while Irene was sent to several orphanages in France. They were separated for many years without hope of ever finding each other again. Luckily, they were reunited upon moving to the US, but many families in similar situations never saw as positive results.
Now it's time for the open letter. But first, let's see what's in the secret compartment. Oh look, it's a mini easel with a Hitler mustache. An open letter to Hitler's art school. Dear art school, what were you thinking when you failed and/or kicked him out? Did you not realize that he was clearly unstable? Maybe he just needed some support in his life, and maybe he was reaching out to you for help. You really can never be sure with these things. But since hindsight is 20/20, we can now learn for the future that if someone seems a little off, maybe you should not fail them from your art school, and instead build them up. Maybe give the individual a special award. Think before you discriminate. Best wishes, Anna T.
Even after liberation, violence towards Jews was still accompanying anti-Semitism prevalent in European and Russian territories. The most extreme example of such violence took place on July 4, 1946 in Kielce, Poland. This day holds significance as a violent massacre known as Kielce pogrom resulted in the death of at least 42 Jews and caused 40 others to be injured. This was all the result of a 9-year-old boy who attempted to avoid punishment by explaining his 2-day absence from home with the claim that he was kidnapped and locked in the basement of the Jewish Committee building, which in fact did not even have a basement. This event, along with other violence towards Jews, was both intended to and succeeded in discouraging the return of Holocaust survivors to Poland and caused many Jewish people to flee the country.
Awesome, thanks Anna. So the thing we have to understand about the Holocaust is that it was done by real people, like us in some ways, very different in others. It can be hard to comprehend that the Holocaust was not a supernatural event or a natural disaster that was unavoidable, and rather, that it was human to human. Understanding this idea that people like us could commit such serious crimes against humanity brings up a very uncomfortable awareness about what us as a species are capable of. Acknowledging the atrocities that humans committed during the Holocaust makes us uncomfortable because they were so terrible, and still we have to try our hardest to understand them, so we do everything we can to prevent anything like the Holocaust from happening again. As a high schooler today said, the Holocaust is so sad because it's reality. While we have to understand the events of the Holocaust for ourselves, during the aftermath of the Holocaust, nations also needed to raise awareness as a whole. After the Holocaust, new governmental laws and expectations were enacted to attempt to prevent a repeat of what the Nazi Party did. As the awareness and push for human rights rapidly increased, nations pledged to prevent and punish genocide as a crime against humanity. The criminal trials that occurred after the Holocaust established that government officials can still be held accountable for any crimes against humanity that they commit. While the government of European countries and politics in general changed, there were many long-term effects on the Jewish people and culture that have lasted into modern days as well. After returning from concentration camps, most often Jewish people had virtually no land or property, no family, no money, and nowhere to go. Because of this, since then, in some cities, the Jewish population affected by the Holocaust has seen the smallest economic growth and lowest wages ever since. Also, in addition to these economic detriments, the Holocaust has left behind long-lasting mental and emotional trauma. As Leah Hammerstein-Silverstein said, "For years you lived like a hunted animal. It really gets to your psyche." The Holocaust has left an enormous political, economic, and cultural impact on the people who experienced it and our world as a whole. Even though this subject can get uncomfortable and difficult for us to talk about, we have to be okay talking about things as uncomfortable and saddening as this. After the Holocaust, the idea of genocide really came into play. Previously, there had not been a concept that appropriately described the nature of the horrible killing of mass groups of people, and now that the idea is present, we have to talk about it. Better yet, if we can talk about it and understand it, we may better understand how to combat the full range of hate crimes. We have to understand that genocide can only begin once the victims are dehumanized, and that if we can prevent that and stop hate from escalating, we may be able to avoid the point of no return. We have to recognize problems before they get too big to control, and we do this by talking about them. Finally, this brings me to my last point. There are obvious prejudices everywhere in our world today. There is hate and discrimination against people who identify as LGBTQ, etc. There is police brutality as well as more obvious racism. We still live in a patriarchal society. There is inequity and oppression everywhere we look. Even though it may not seem as blatantly horrific as the Holocaust, no human should ever be without the rights that all humans deserve. We need to take action against these horrendous events. We need to have conversations. We need to break family traditions of loathing certain groups of people or resenting a different religion, ethnicity, or social class. We need to question ourselves and challenge others who we disagree with. We need to improve acceptance in this world to end violence, to promote peace, justice, and equality. Please do not turn a blind eye to oppression. Your voices need to be heard.
I'm Jordan.
I'm Anna.
And I'm Hope. Thanks for
Watching Crash Course World History. Cue the credits, Dan.
Thanks for everyone who supported us.
Thanks for watching.